The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mysteries of life. This podcast is a complement to the Numinous School, my online intuition development program for people who want their self-awareness to serve a greater good. Registration for the Numinous School only happens once a year in the spring. I'll tell you more about that after the interview. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and today on the podcast, I'm connecting with Elizabeth Brown. Elizabeth is a master dowser and author of Dowsing, the Ultimate Guide for the 21st Century. Her storied career includes the co-founding and running of a geopathic stress consultancy. She's also studied with two former presidents of the British Society of Dowsers and is trained in remote viewing and more. Elizabeth uses dowsing to help people get to the root of their health troubles. Since I use a pendulum probably daily for work and gardening and prioritizing tasks, I was absolutely over the moon when Elizabeth, one of the world's foremost authorities on the topic, accepted my invitation to be on the show. I connected with Elizabeth online. She was at home in Monaco. So Elizabeth, what identities do you lead with?
Basically, I'm a dowser, a professional dowser. And I've been dowsing for 30 years, actually this year. I was trained in America with someone in Virginia at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, in fact. And when I came back to the UK, and I trained with the British Society of Dowsers, originally as a water dowser because you do, but very quickly it was obvious that wasn't where my interest lied. And I went on to run a geopathic stress and electromagnetic environmental energies consultancy. And then very quickly that led into what I do today. And it was really prompted by clients that would say, well, did this geopathic stress or did this electromagnetic pollution, did this cause my cancer or did this cause this? And everybody wants to know the causes. And so I pioneered something called causative diagnosis, which is what I do today. And that's my main everything, really. my obsession and my career.
Thank you. I already have questions just about some of the languages you've used, but I think if we give you a bit more time to just explain, let's begin with some of the prevailing myths about dowsing. So immediately you've said what you've said. Probably some of us are like, oh, she's a water witch, and other people are going, dowsing, what is geopathic stress? So let's start with some of the myths of dowsing, and then can you please explain to us what it actually is and what the science has found dowsing is?
Okay, in the simplest terms, dowsing is just a means of finding out. It's actually connecting ourselves to the field of information, and I believe we do that on two different levels. We do it on an electromagnetic level, and we do it also on a quantum level. So it's really, so the traditional image of dowsing is an old man with a forked stick walking along and searching for underground water. But of course it can be used for so much more than that, and has been actually over the centuries. So finding archaeological remains, finding water, long history with health, and finding underground anything, whether it's the army finding underground buried unexploded bombs and mines, to finding precious metals and minerals, tin, diamonds, gold. So it's a means of finding out, or it's a means of finding answers to anything that's hidden from the human perception, from the conscious eye or the conscious senses. So you can also find out information. It doesn't have to be something that's solid and concrete. What does science say? Science says there's no proof and no evidence, and it's not possible. in most of the world, apart from Russia, who actually run university courses on it, so they must believe in it or believe that it works.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, people who use it, like governments and farmers and water companies and the army, in fact, all the forces, all the armed forces who use dowsers or employ dowsers, and particularly utility companies like water companies and gas, electricity, telephone companies, all know it works, but they'll just, they can't really admit that it's very sad, they can't admit that they use it because of public condemnation. We had a case recently in the UK. Some woman complained that the dowser was seen waving around sticks in somebody, and when she discovered it in a little bit more research, she found that nearly every water utility company in the UK actually had dowsers on their payroll, and she made a whole fuss about it being this is shareholders' money and a terrible investment, and it was witchcraft and completely. So you've got these two very diverse opinions. So the truth really isn't out there yet, not properly.
Well, I really appreciated your book, Dowsing. That's the title, and partially because you did such great research, not only on the history, but also on the studies that have been conducted and what science is at least trying to find out. You said it's both quantum and electromagnetic. In your book, you cite studies of different organizations and places that are trying to bring to light how this could be. I was particularly interested, though, in one of the researchers, Dr. Harvalik. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
Harvalik, yes.
Harvalik, right. He spoke about many tests where they were trying to figure out how is this being registered in the physical body. Could you talk a little bit about that, about some of what he suspects are his theories?
I can, but I actually think it's his research wasn't out. It was not out of date. What he discovered was relevant to the time, but we know so much more about the human body. We know, for example, that every single cell not only has receptor sites, but every single cell has little electromagnetic radio antennas. And I firmly believe that this is all, that the whole body is in fact the dowsing instrument. It's a whole body experience. It's not just through one physical part of the body. It's a whole body experience, because in essence, at ground state, we're all an energy field. Everything is energy. There is no solid matter. It's just all held together by consciousness. And so we're an energy field, and it's actually communication through energy field. And that's how we tap into, if you like, the field, what Lynn McTaggart would call the field, or the Akashic field, or infinite consciousness, or the superconscious mind, or any of those, or any of that terminology.
Similar to Rupert Sheldrake and his work on
Absolutely.
morphogenetic fields. And that sort of
Absolutely, yeah. Rupert Sheldrake does fantastic stuff on. In fact, I've met Rupert. We had a discussion about this, but yes, absolutely. Tapping into, he talks about morphic fields, but this is more directly to the information field.
You mentioned the Akashic field. Also, many people, I think, listening probably have heard, especially if they're in kind of like New Age or like Instagram witch kind of circles, that they've heard of the Akashic records. But you also cite in your book an interesting link with Dr. Irvin Laszlo about the Akashic records. Can you define that? Because I think a lot of people, they hear what that is, but how is it relating to what you're describing?
Well, he's a quantum theorist, quantum physicist, and what the reason it was called an A field was after the traditional idea of the Akashic record or the Akashic field, and that's why he's in honor of that, really, because this is where science and spirituality actually came together. The whole idea of there is a record of everything that has ever happened, the A field, because the information field is the field where everything is stored, everything is preserved, and everything actually can also be retrieved from the Akashic field or the A field or the information field. Really, it's all the same thing. It's just different names for the same thing. But we can, and in fact, Dr. David Hawkins said the same thing. It's like we're a computer terminal attached to a giant database. And this is actually what dowsing is actually connecting in for our individual computer terminals and tapping into this giant database of information that can be retrieved. And really, again, that's what dowsing is.
You mentioned earlier there is a difference between how the Russian authorities are approaching dowsing as a trade, really, as opposed to almost anywhere else in the world, though of course the British Society of Dowsers is a very well-established association, but still there's the skepticism and secrecy and a bit of cover-up with authorities, I think, in North America and a lot of Europe. In your book, you talk about some of the differences. Can you just explain a little bit more about how the Russians are doing it a little bit differently? I found it fascinating to see that their approach just kind of flipped that on its head. How are they different?
I think is because there's a very, very long tradition, although you could argue that that exists in the United States as well with the indigenous tribes, and in fact, indigenous tribes all around the world use dowsing because it was a means of survival. And so you've got the history of the Aboriginal tribes in Australia and the Maoris in New Zealand and the Bedouin in the Middle East. They all use dowsing as a means of survival, a means of finding water, as a means of finding food. And that also existed in Russia and Eastern Europe. Very, very long history of people using dowsing. And so it was part of their culture. It was really part of their culture. And I met a Russian, amazing man called Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who is an inventor. And he's also at St. Petersburg University as a professor. And he has teams of scientists that they work on all sorts of things. And he said, oh yeah, all my team use dowsing. We use dowsing first to find the information, and then we confirm it by using machines. So it's very accepted throughout Russia, and again used for utility companies and even road building for building roads where there aren't any spots with geopathic stress or black energies somewhere. And so much in their culture that you can actually take a university degree in dowsing, which I think is amazing. I mean, I really do.
Yeah, well, and it I think helps kind of de-center a bit of a Western European or like North American worldview. It's like, guess what? Not everybody feels skeptical about this. There's a kind of common sense to it.
But there's the dichotomy, there's the hypocrisy, because the CIA have used dowsers for years. And if you you can Google Paul H. Smith, who worked for the CIA. He was also a remote viewer. He also teaches dowsing, and he confirms that the CIA and other intelligence agencies use dowsing to find out information. And he sort of differentiated between the two, but also said one supports the other, because if you're remote viewing, you're extending consciousness and you're pulling together a vision. I mean, I trained in remote viewing, so I know how it works and the difference. So you're extending consciousness and a vision starts to appear in front of you, whether it's halfway around the world, and then you can take information from it. But he used the very good example of, then they had perhaps drugs coming in on a container ship into a port. The remote viewer would be able to see the drugs in a container on the ship, but they wouldn't be able to necessarily say which container it was. But a dowser would be able to say, yes, it's the third one from the left on the second row, going upwards from the port side on the. So the two together are actually extremely powerful, and this is why intelligence services, not only in America, but around the world, use dowsing and use those two things in conjunction.
So fascinating. I think one of the things you highlighted that I hadn't known previously is that, well, and you mentioned hypocrisy. I think in a lot of the Western nations, we had a bit of a church problem around dowsing. Can you describe some of your research around the Catholic Church and dowsing there?
But it's not, it's the same the world over. It's very interesting. The Catholic Church, I mean, for ages, they had, oh, it's the work of the devil, because in the catechism, the Catholic catechism, it actually says that dowsing or forms of dowsing are, I think, like witchcraft or
divination.
They're all divination, and it's all forbidden. But then you have some of the most famous dowsers that, I mean, and the most accomplished, that actually were not just Catholics, but Catholic priests and Catholic clergy. And the most famous probably is the Bishop of Grenoble, who was a water dowser and gave his name to what's called the Bishop's Rule. It's a method of finding how deep water is underground, measuring it from the center of a watercourse. But then you had people like Father Jean Jurian, who worked with it with health. Abbe Mermet as well, but my absolute favorite, the Abbe Alexis Boully. I mean, he was an extraordinary man. He started out by he was taught water dowsing, and then he went on to the next thing he did, I think the next thing he discovered that after the First World War, he could actually allocate unexploded bombs underground, buried underground, and not only before they were dug up, not only that they were there, but also whose bombs they were, and whether they were German or French or British. And he worked for the French government doing this. And then after the war, he turned his hand to mineral dowsing and worked with the French government's French authorities, finding minerals like tin, I think, and silver. And then he went on to be a health dowser. I mean, he was an extraordinary, and he was an abbé. And in fact, he was a friend of my husband's grandfather. And extraordinary man in every way, to the point where the French actually awarded him the Légion d'honneur for his services to France through dowsing. So you've got this complete, it's banned by the church, and yet he's given the Légion d'honneur. And I find this because I teach in the Middle East. I'm a tutor, a trainer, if you like, for the International Academy for Personal Development in Kuwait, and I travel around the Middle East, and I get to meet people from many, many different countries, and I hear all the stories from the Bedouin, and they all use dowsing. They use dowsing to find camels. They use dowsing to find water. They use dowsing to site their beehives for optimal yield. They use dowsing to plant trees and shrubs for optimal growth. And I find this totally fascinating. So I go out there and I teach it. And last time I was there in one of the countries, they slapped a fatwa on dowsing. And the authorities threatened to close down the hotel where the workshop was taking place. So I wasn't allowed to do it. And I was fine. I was totally safe. That was never an issue. But it's a problem. And so now, instead of visiting there, we do it by webinar mostly. But here again is this long tradition of tribes, indigenous tribes, nomadic tribes, using dowsing for something as important as survival, finding water, growing food, etc. And yet the authorities are sort of slapping it down, and the science saying no, it doesn't work, but it obviously does.
Yeah, because the data reveals, the results
Absolutely.
are. Yeah. You actually also spoke about another very interesting man, Applegate, who
oh, dear George.
Yeah.
He
Talk about
died.
him. Talk about dear George.
Dear George has died. He was 90 something. I think he was still alive when I wrote the book, because I interviewed him. And I mean, this is another extra, probably the best water dowser on this side of the pond anyway. And he'd sunk at the time of interviewing I think it was 3,500 wells with a 99% success rate.
Wow.
And he works for utility companies, but also people like Madonna, who wanted a well, and the Prince of Wales, who wanted water on his agricultural land, and lots of luminaries, and obviously it worked because they wouldn't keep having him back. But what was good about George is that he was also a trained water engineer, putting those two things together. Expertise in your subject and training as a dowser is a very, very potent combination.
Mm-hmm. Well, and thank you for bringing that up, because you mentioned in your book something that I've only learned through trial and error, but it was so nice to just see it named. If only I'd read it, a couple decades ago. But you talk about how important it is to find your niche as a dowser. Some of the mistakes that we can make when we're trying to go for water, and it turns out that's not really our jam. We're like way better with health or something like that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it all came to a head because of the dead dog, my dead dog story. And my editor wouldn't, in the book, wouldn't let me write all about this dead dog, because she said I'd alienate all dog lovers anyway. I mean, I do happen to be a dog lover, but this woman lost her dog, and I did all this dowsing for her, and I check, recheck. I'm a very, very, very thorough, almost over the top, to detail, check, and recheck. And I did. And my dowsing said the dog was close to death and it was lost and there was little hope. But I was very careful and very diplomatic what I said to the owner, but behind closed doors, I'm going, oh my God, this dog is, it's lost, it's dead. There's no chance. And then she came back to me a few days later. The dog's found. He's just run into the house and he's fine. I mean, he's a bit, but he's absolutely fine. And I thought, how did I get it so wrong? This, of course, is we learn from our best lessons from our worst tragedies. And so I went to another well-loved dowser, who again has died in the meantime, Hamish Miller, one of the best dowsers and the most humble dowsers ever. He wrote the most beautiful book that I would highly recommend to beginners, called The Wee Book of Dowsing. And Hamish was very was very emphatic. It was really about two things about this niche thing. He said most dowsers think that they can do anything, but they may be able to. He said, but it's really unlikely. And the more you focus on one thing, the better you get at it. So that's one reason for finding a niche. And I really support his words on this one. I mean, I've been researching health now for 36 years. And so I kind of know what I'm talking about in the health field. But the other thing that Hamish said was that he believes that there is guidance from, as he called, upstairs, to keep you on a particular path, to guide you in the way you're supposed to be using your skills or gifts for humanity. And he said, and upstairs will always keep you on the path you're meant to be on with this, with finding your niche. And he was absolutely right. I mean, I'm glad, because I dropped all the other forms of any sort of dowsing apart from health and the occasional personal guidance and advice for clients. But he's absolutely right. The more you focus on it, the more, and in fact, the words he used were, you wouldn't go to a brain surgeon or to do your feet. He said, you go to a specialist, and it's important to, if you want to become professional, to be a specialist at that one thing.
So you work as a causative diagnostician, and you identify the causative, contributory, and trigger factors behind a previously diagnosed disorder or set of symptoms that has no label or explanation. So that, I think I know what that means, but I'm curious. And I was thinking about this specifically because I mentioned this on another episode that I have had these allergies that have gone through all these different phases, and I've done all the things. I have an organic bed. I've done the elimination diets, all this kind of stuff. And for some reason in the last couple of years, just that nasal congestion stays. And I was thinking, oh, I could douse for but what would that look like if I came to you? What would a session be like if we were going to do some health dowsing?
Okay. So it's quite in depth because I'm working with all types of chronic metabolic disease. And so that's all the way from allergies, all the way through the rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, ME, CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, right the way through to cancer. And cancer is what I specialize in. And so a consultation would look like. It's usually between 2 or 3 hours. The first part is that I take a full history of the client. It's really, really important. And you can't skip that part. You can't skimp on that part. And it's quite in depth because I had to understand how that person ticks. And in fact, if I'm honest, while I'm taking that history, little light bulbs are going off in my head all the time. The second part of the consultation is I take all my a set of health readings, and they are again in depth because they tell a completely different story, or they tell a deeper, more profound story of what's going on. So I can measure any function or any organ or anything in the human body with dowsing.
And are you using rods? Are you using a pendulum?
Yes.
Like, what's
Yeah.
your, okay.
I use rods.
Okay.
Because why? Because for me they're quicker, they're more responsive,
Mm,
and they're more flexible in
mm,
terms of what I want to do. The next section after the health readings, I then ask for the causative, contributory, and trigger factors, as you correctly said, behind the condition, or I may be guided for something else because sometimes the condition isn't really what it's at.
mm.
There may be something else that we're looking at. For example, with your allergies and sinus things, I did a very, very brief check, but it's actually you have compromised immune system. Now, what's causing that compromised immune system? That's what that is what would come to light in the body. So, and it's a finite list. It's an absolute finite list. So I douse on the number first. So it might be 6 causative factors, 2 contributory factor, and 1 trigger factor, or
Oh,
3 of
wow.
each,
That
or
is
1.
super fascinating.
Yeah.
I love this detail. That's
So once you have the numbers, so if there are 5 causative factors, you have to find the 5 causative factors. You're not sort of aimlessly dowsing along. Is there another one? Is there another one? No, we get the numbers done first, and then within that, 5 causative factors. And then so I've identified then in each person, absolutely unique. They have, even if 6 women had breast cancer, their causative, contributory, and trigger factors would all be different, completely different. There may be factors across breast cancer that are similar, and in fact there are, but for these women it may be something completely different. And then I put together what I call the action list, and the action list is everything that needs to be done in order to return the body back to balance. And actually, that's the only thing I'm allowed to claim officially because I'm not medically qualified. So back to balance is what I'm allowed. But on that list may be, for example, practitioners, either holistic or medical doctors. It may be lifestyle changes. It may be nutrition. It may be therapies. It may be one-to-one consulting session. It may be nutrition. It may be diet. It may be exercise. It may be a million different things. And so, again, that list is always going to be completely unique to that person. And what I do say to people, if they choose to follow that list, then I will support them. If they choose to address everything on that list, I will support them for 6 months, which I do, and take their health readings on a monthly basis, which I email to them. I don't need to speak to them. And this does two things. It gives me reassurance because the numbers should be going up. It gives me reassurance that what I've suggested is in their best interest. If the numbers start going down, then alarm bells start ringing. It
going down in terms of that number is about well-being.
Increasing, and if they're going up, that means that they're improving.
Right.
Going down is that there's something going wrong. And the second thing it does for the client is that it gives them encouragement that they're heading in the right direction. Because when the body goes from, say, protective mode into healing mode, and you can't be in both at the same time, there is a switch. When the body first starts to heal, it starts at ground state level, and people don't see that or necessarily feel that. So they may, for example, start absorbing nutrition, or they may, and that's one of the first things to do, or the what Bruce Lipton calls the IMP function, the integral membrane protein function. It's the passage of nutrients and waste products through the cell wall that might start to improve. Now, you're not going to consciously know that that's happening, but when people see the readings start to shift and going up, they think, wow, something's happening. This is great. Keep going, keep going. And they'll say to me, I don't feel any better. And then I go, nope, but you wouldn't necessarily know this, but look at the readings. And that's a way of encouraging people to keep going when you make that turning point from protective mode into healing mode.
I recently read a study that was theorizing that the placebo effect is actually the body's response to receiving care. And
yes.
so you're doing this reading, and there are things that are imperceptible, especially for a person who obviously would come to you if they had some presenting, current troubling issue, and you're providing care for the things they can't sense. And so it's sort of like it amplifies the effect, and I think it's the feedback loop within the field.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes.
Sort of
that's a lovely way of pushing it. I like that. Yes. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about your thoughts for beginners anyway on pendulum charts. Do you, that's, I think, one that maybe beginners to dowsing would pick up a pendulum and do a bunch of yes or no questions. Because you see pendulums in like new age stores everywhere. And then maybe the next level is charts. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Everyone has to start somewhere. It's a great way to start. I, in fact, in the very beginning, I was taught with rods, and I tried a pendulum, but it didn't really agree with me. If I'm in a position where I can't use a pendulum, I'll use my arm instead. So I'll physically sort of bend over slightly to the right and let my arm swing free, and then ask for a yes and no, and my arm will act as a pendulum. So that's what I use, but otherwise I use rods. Yes and no questions are great to start practicing with. However, in real life, there's rarely anything that's black and white and yes and no. Everything is by degrees, which is why I calibrate. I don't do yes and no very often. I calibrate.
Meaning, like, to what degree is this true kind of
absolutely. Thing? Well, not necessarily true, but for example, somebody might they send me a list of 10 schools for their child and say, should he attend any of these schools? So what I do is calibrate each one on a scale of 1 to 10. So this is 7 out of 10, this is 9 out of 10, this is 3 out of 10. Oh, this is 10 out of 10. So they can pick the top 3, but it's never going to be just a yes or no. And if you had a yes or no list anyway, that wouldn't necessarily be very helpful. But it gives you so much more information. I was never taught with charts. I never learned with charts, so I've never used charts. And people find this quite surprising. But even with the astonishing depth I go into with the causative diagnosis process, in fact, it surprises me now. For many years, everything was in my head. I had nothing written down. But until it became so overwhelming and I had so many clients, I had to start writing lists. So I do use lists in a way as prompts, but I don't use charts. I calibrate. So you'll find all the organs or bodily functions or everything I'm measuring with the health readings, I will measure on a percentage basis, and it keeps it easy across the board, and it's easy to compare then. So everything is a percentage. So if it's immune system or general health, or the health of the pancreas, or the peristalsis function, or the mitochondria, or the level of health of the efficiency of the mitochondria, or the gut microbiome, or the oral microbiome, I put a percentage on everything. And it also, you can see when it starts also to improve. So I think charts are good for directing you in a way, but I've always firmly believed that dowsing is a portable skill, and you might find yourself in the middle of nowhere with no charts. And it's important for me that you can actually utilize the full dowsing process without anything else. Because if you were in an emergency situation, or if we're in a Holocaust or something, you ain't gonna have no charts. It's going to be you and that's I was just thinking of a story to illustrate that. When I fell over in London, and I'm really bad fall, and I'm lying on the pavement, and people are shouting there should be an ambulance, and I don't know if I've broken my leg or not, and I said to my husband, can you just douse to see, because I'm lying flat on the floor, I can't, and just see if I need an ambulance, if I've broken my leg, if I need further assistance. And it was kind of yes to all of it, and I go, oh no, but gut feeling didn't just feel right. And so eventually, when they propped me up against a chair, I could use my arm to douse, and I got no to everything. and that's a very good case of an example of you should never douse when you're in an emotional state. And of course he was, because he was so worried about me and what had happened, and in his fear, you shouldn't ever douse in a state of fear. He got all his worst fears confirmed with dowsing. Of course, it wasn't correct. I didn't have an ambulance. I did go home. I hadn't broken anything, and I recovered fine. But yeah, I feel that I think that charts have a purpose. I think they're very useful, but I think then people can go on and use their own style, because there are really very few hard and fast rules in dowsing. And everyone, it's a bit like when you learn to drive. You to get through your test, you have to do everything properly, and you do all the things you're supposed to do to get to. And then 10 years later, you're cutting corners and doing things you shouldn't do and everything. But I really believe that everyone then develops their own style. Oh, I don't do it that way. I do it this way. I don't. But it's fine. But if you get the results, if you're getting to the truth, then that's all that matters.
You said you should never douse in a state of fear. And of course, I think many people grab their pendulum, or they do a little dowsing because something has come up, and there's some eruption, and they want to do that. So I'm curious about what would you say to beginners about how to get into the right frame of mind and the right sort of somatic condition, so that you're going to get an ideal, or at least more accurate response when you're dowsing?
The one question I'm asked more than anything is whether you can influence the dowsing tool. Let's call it the dowsing tool, because the true dowsing instrument is the human body. All the pendulum does, or the rods do, are amplify the minute micromuscular movements.
The ideomotor response, is that what that is?
Not exactly.
Okay.
No.
Not quite, but it's just like tiny little
micromuscular movements that come, the physical movements that come from the human body. And the dowsing rods are actually amplifying that, and the pendulum is amplifying that.
Okay.
You can actually override that response if you let the conscious mind, which is very powerful, with your fears and your expectations and your wishes, override. They will drown out the natural subconscious response. So yes, you can. All you've got to do actually is hold a pendulum and say to it, move in a clockwise direction. Of course it will. It's very easy to see that. And this really puts people off, and they, okay, well, it's not for me then. How do I know it's true? How do I know it's true? How do I know it's a true answer? Well, the answer to that is really only experience. And following certain guidelines. And one of them is, do not douse when you're in an emotional state, when you're tired, when you're feeling unwell, because tiredness, your nervous system will be misfiring in a way. But if you're asking a question like, does my boyfriend still love me? And you're really, really uptight about this, then you're going to get the answer you want, not the truth. And so what I say is, you cannot have any vested interest in the answer. You can only have a vested interest in truth. And it's really about training yourself that all you want is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You're really there to be in alignment with the universe, really, because if the universe is perfect, we just need to be in alignment with that perfection. And so then you really want to be in alignment with truth. And if you can't detach yourself, it's about detachment. If you can't detach yourself, if you can't stand back and say, whatever the answer is, I will accept it, whether he loves me or he doesn't love me, I will accept that truth. If you can't detach yourself to that level, then leave it for another occasion or give it to someone else to douse on.
Yeah,
I
well,
think.
I wonder about this too, because one of the things that's evolved with friends of mine, that I know them to be quite good dowsers. And so if I'm too charged about something, sometimes I just ask them blind questions. We'll even text. I'll just text and say, I have a question in my heart. Is it, yes or no? And like, to what degree? And I've totally loved just observing the results of this over the last 5 or 6 years. I have found it very useful. Is that
Yeah.
because the 3 or 4 of us have our own field, or do you think that's pretty common?
I do the same thing I use with my husband, and we'll douse on something separately, which is a slightly different thing. But yes, I will say, I'm holding something in mind. Do you get that to be true or non-true? True. No, it's not necessarily just because you're connected, because I've been in workshop situations when I will hold the rods, and a student who's totally unknown to me will ask a question and the rods will move in a direction or not. They've asked the question in their head. I'm holding the rods and the rods with it. And in fact, when I work with clients, because my rods are programmed to respond to truth. So if I'm sitting in the south of France and I've got a client in New Zealand, and I'll just hold the rods and they'll talk, and they will respond to the truth or the not truth of what the client is saying, and there's really no connection there with a brand new client. But yes,
I'm laughing that you're doing that, because I sometimes do that when I'm working online with clients, and we won't have video on, but I'll just have my pendulum there and I'm just like, talk about this issue. And I just let them talk and the pendulum will swing in. And when we start getting actually to the root of an issue, I'll be like, okay, say more about that. So I love that you also are a little, not sneaky. I mean, if they're coming to you, they know you're doing that, but that's a technique.
Absolutely, because I will say, does this particular situation upset you, or do you have strong feelings about it? And they'll go, no, I'm quite cool with it. And the rods will go, no, no. And I'd be totally upfront and say, well, to be honest, the rods are saying that there is an issue there. Let's explore what that might be. So yes, it's this invisible. I mean, we're all connected, aren't we? Anyway. We're all connected. We're all part of one consciousness. I love it. It's Neil Donald Walsh, isn't it? So there is only one of us in this room. I love all that. So that, again, that's how dowsing works. Since, at the risk of sounding like a stuck record, all these great spiritual teachers and some scientists, people like Amit Goswami, who is, another quantum theorist, but they're all saying the same thing. And they all illustrate or support that dowsing works.
And you also talk about how, really, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a precursor, but that some of the wisdom amongst dowsers is there really does need to be a need. There has to be a legitimate need. So
Mm.
for folks that are kind of I don't want to say obsessively, but who are asking about kind of low grade stuff or constantly, or they're just like really on their rods or their tool because it's fascinating. What would you say about like how do we discern when we have a real need and dowsing is a good technique to use for that?
I think anyone with a few brain cells would probably be able to discern what's a need and not. I mean, it's if I'm saying, oh, what color is the prime minister's underpants? I mean, there's no need for me to know that. But obviously, if I'm working on healthcare, I'll give you a brief story of a good example of this. I worked with a woman with a child who had pernicious anemia, I think it was. This was quite some years ago. And I identified all the causative factors and exactly what to do. She was so thrilled. I was at her home. I did a site visit and we talked it all through and she had all the answers. And just as I was leaving, she said, "Oh, my husband's got a problem with a skin condition." And she said, "I'd like you to work with him. Can we do it now? We can find out the cause of his skin condition." And I said, "Well, I'll ask." And the rod said, "No." And I said, "Oh, well," she said, "What do you mean they're saying no?" And I said, "Well, they're saying no, I can't help with that." She said, "But you just did my son. We've got all that." And I said, "Yes, so the son we're working through you for the benefit of your son, which is fine." I mean, perhaps he was 18 months or something like that. But we don't have your husband's permission to do this, so I can't do it. And she was actually quite rather upset about it. And that was fine. So I went home and I was curious about this. So I thought, I said, can I ask about this? Can I get some background information of it? Yes, I can. And the skin condition primarily was as a result of a stress from a very uncomfortable situation he'd put himself in. And if that had been revealed to his wife, that would have been the end of their marriage.
Mm.
Now, I was allowed to know that because it wasn't going to go any further and it would help towards my understanding. But you can see when there's a need and not a need, or when you have permission or when you don't have permission. It's the same sort of thing. But there's a few stories in the book about people trying to use dowsing to win the lottery, or trying to make money off the stock exchange, and I think you've probably read that, and it went horribly wrong. And there was no need, or it wasn't. And I think it does come down to something like this we're talking about with dowsing. I don't like the word, but it's a spiritual practice. It's spiritual. It's a divine practice. It's in line with the universe, with the flow of the universe. And it should be used for the benefit of humankind.
Mm.
All life, I mean animals obviously as well. And so if that's an easy way to delineate it, so if it's for the benefit of humankind, and that's quite easy to work out.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. So the last question on the podcast is always the same, and it's about how you cope with really strong feelings. So we talked about fear, but I always ask my guests how they cope with grief and with rage. And when you're in those states and you can't be dowsing, trying to figure out what do I do, how do you personally process those kinds of emotions like grief and rage?
And this is nothing to do with dowsing. This is just about grief and rage. I don't. This is going to sound really pretentious, but I don't actually feel. I feel very little grief and rage about anything these days. And I had last year the ultimate test when my mother died. which you would think as your mother, that would be an instance to be. And I didn't really feel grief. I didn't cry. But then a double whammy, because the family member organized the funeral on the day I couldn't get there. So I didn't go to my mother's own mother's funeral. And so you'd think that would be rage. And I think the way, because I tend to process things and probably overanalyze, but analyze things to work out why this is happening, why, if there's a lesson in it. And I reason it out. And in fact, when I thought it through, I realized, because I was the last one to spend time with my mother, and I had a gift of the last half an hour talking to her. Nobody knew. They thought she got another 4 weeks at that point, and she died the next morning, and so it was quite a shock to everyone. I had the gift of really that last time with her. I was the last family member to speak to her. And I thought, well, no, do I need to go to the funeral? Actually, I don't. And I have closure, because nothing would ever come close to that gift that I was given on her last few hours. But of course, with a funeral, you hope that you're there for others, and also to give support and everything. But that was taken away from me, and I know why. I think I know why now, which I won't go into. But I tend to process things, and I use the same analytical mind I use for when I'm dowsing, to look at personal circumstances, because I think we're here to learn, and if something is happening to you, it's a gift for you to grow and expand. The only thing I've got in a rage, just inarticulately in a rage about recently, is geoengineering and chemtrails, because it makes you feel so helpless, I think. And it's the harm to the planet, to Gaia, and that was difficult. That was really difficult. But in that sort of case, it helps to understand there's always a bigger picture. Everything is a process. And if it's happening, it means that people haven't got to that point of knowledge, or that turning point where they're going to get the impetus to do something about it. And we have to get this sort of information out there. When there's enough people who are outraged, then things will start to change. And I think it's going to actually get a lot worse before it gets better, and more people sort of get off their bottoms on the sofa and say, we need to do something about this. So it's a process, and now I can look at them with feeling, but with detachment. I have to be detached. It's my job. And if I'm dealing with 6 cancer patients in a week, I cannot in any way let my emotions get involved, because I'm there to serve them, to help them, and I have to remain detached. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And part of me, if we had a different theme, I'd be like, let's go into some of the occupational hazards of being a healer. And the things you need to do, but I think what I'll say instead to end is just thank you very much for your service. Thank you very much for educating us today and sharing your gift. Yes, you've studied, and yes, you trained, but some people have the touch, and not everybody does, and you've developed it for the sake of others. I really appreciate you sharing it, Elizabeth. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, and thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I've so much enjoyed meeting you.
Oh, who else was totally geeking out in that episode with me? Where are my people who are totally into dowsing? Oh, so good. I love her. To find out more about Elizabeth's work, to find links to her website and her book, and also to the many other resources she so generously mentioned in this episode, you can find all the show notes under the podcast tab on my website, carmenspaniola.com. That is also where you can find out more about the Numinous School of Intuition. Just click on the courses link in the upper navigation. So yes, the Numinous School opens for registration on June 1st, but if you'd like a payment plan, you'll need to be on my email list in March, because March is when the payment plans begin. You know, people contact me all the time, worried that they're going to miss the registration date. That's the number one worry. The second one is that they won't be able to afford it. So I'll just let you know, it's $495 US. And if you want a payment plan, that's totally no problem. There's no extra charge or admin fee for that, but you just have to start the payment plan in March. So get on my newsletter to do that. Today, I would like to thank my listeners in Virginia, which was where Elizabeth did her first training in dowsing. My son Enzo actually, even before knowing that I had done this interview with Elizabeth, or that she mentioned that, he said, "You should thank your listeners in West Virginia." And I don't know why he said that, but I like to think that he's tuned into the larger field we were talking about earlier. So thanks everyone in West Virginia. Thank you, all the folks in the Blue Ridge Mountains, all those who are listening. I know there are some because I see the little dots on the map when I look at my stats every once in a while. Thank you for spending time with us. I hope it was exciting for you, and I'm sure there was, so much that those of us who live near to a lineage of dowsing, whether it's water dowsing or mineral dowsing, there are places where, that is still so active. There's still, I had a water witch just up the block from me, and yeah, I'm sure there are so many good stories. I bet if I went on Instagram and started following dowsers, I'd be able to find some really interesting people and characters. Anyway, let's just finish by talking about Quest. Yes, Ruben and I are leading Quest this year from June 24th to July 6th. It's a 12-day journey. In the middle of it, you'll spend 4 days on your own on the mountain with water, but no food. You'll be fasting, and no tent, but you will have a sleeping bag. So yeah, it's definitely an intense rite of passage, but if you would like to learn more about it, just go to my website, just click on the Quest tab. You'll definitely receive excellent training. So don't worry about that. Your body and your soul are safe with us. You'll gather with us and Elder Norman Ratasket of Shuswap Nation, and Rancher Charlie Coldwell, who's been 125 years his family has been on his land, and his beautiful herd of horses. You'll sit down with us for many meals and fireside chats. I'll sing you some old Gaelic songs. People often say to me, "Don't you mean Gaelic?" It's Gaelic if it's Irish. It's Gaelic if it's Scottish. Anyway, I'll sing you songs about the moon and your soul and finding our way back to each other in this crazy world. So make it easy on yourself and start your payment plan now. And if this isn't your year for Quest, but you'd like a taste of the experience for a fraction of the time and expense, you might consider coming to Vestalia, a women's summer solstice celebration. That's also happening at our Quest location from June 20th to 23rd. You'll still get to meet Elder Norman, total character, lovely man, and we'll be feasting and storytelling, doing lots of making and ritual. You'll have a chance to do your own mini solo ritual as you take your turn tending the sacred fire sometime in the middle of the night on your own, keeping the flames alive for the rest of us, just you and the fire and the stars and the coyotes and probably my dog Mona, just to keep you company. You'll keep those flames alive until our summer sunrise solstice ceremony on the hill facing the mountains. Get all the details about Vestalia and Quest and the Numinous School, and of course Elizabeth's links to her websites as well at carmenspaniola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.